The chill on Varela was not just a temperature, it was a sentient, biting presence. Mason descended the shuttle ramp, boots crunching on frost-bitten ground, his visor's readout flickering with readings of the planet's toxic, glittering snow. Above, the sky shimmered with veins of emerald light, remnants of the last atmospheric surge. Nothing about this world welcomed him. The silence at the Lysian research station was absolute. He paused at the edge of the docking bay, the soles of his boots leaving fleeting impressions in the iridescent ice. The air tasted faintly metallic through the filters of his helmet, heavy with the trace elements that made human lungs ache. Each breath he took fogged the inside of his visor, and he wiped it clear with a gloved finger, searching for any sign of life. Within the main docking bay, the structure was a cathedral of frost, arched beams of translucent ice, casting prismatic shadows across the cavernous hall. The silence pressed in on him, broken only by the hum of his suit's life support. Pale shafts of greenish light, refracted by the crystalline ceiling, fell in shifting patterns at his feet. From one of those shadows stepped a figure, willowy, skin a pale, luminous green, hair a cascade of deep red, eyes bright as polished emeralds. Her ears, elegantly pointed, bore delicate thorns along the edges. Intricate filigree of the same fine thorns traced her cheeks and arms, catching the light with a subtle gleam. Commander Sirai moved with the deliberate grace of someone who never wasted emotion, her presence as sharp as the planet's air. She halted several paces from him, posture regal and reserved, arms folded behind her back. The Lysian uniform clung to her figure, woven from a bioluminescent fabric that shimmered with her every breath. Her gaze, unblinking and penetrating, seemed to dissect him through the reinforced layers of his environmental suit. "Terran, your arrival was not forecast," she intoned, her voice crystalline, echoing in his helmet with a strange resonance that seemed to vibrate in his bones. Mason straightened, mustering a polite smile that felt awkward in the frigid air. "Sorry for the abrupt entrance, Commander Sirai. The situation seemed urgent enough to skip the usual channels." He kept his voice steady, aware that every flicker of emotion would be scrutinized. The Lycians, he'd been told, read faces like weather patterns, but their own expressions were as inscrutable as the frozen landscape. She studied him in silence for a heartbeat longer than was comfortable, taking in the lines at the corners of his mouth and the set of his jaw. "Urgency is a Terran indulgence. Our projections indicated a gradual decline. Your kind is known for dramatics." The faintest downturn of her lips, almost imperceptible, was all the rebuke she allowed herself. He suppressed a shiver, unsure if it was from the cold or her gaze. "Maybe so, Commander. But sometimes a little drama is what saves a world." He let the words hang between them, daring her to dismiss the urgency he carried. A flicker, unreadable, crossed her emerald eyes. Behind her, two more Lysians materialized from the shadows, their forms echoing Cirrh's, pale green skin adorned with thorny patterns, their movements fluid and precise. They watched him in utter silence, the gulf between their species made all the wider by the unspeaking witnesses. Despite the chill, Mason felt a spark of curiosity ignite within him. Something in the set of Cirrh's shoulders, the arch of her brows, suggested she was more than the sum of her protocols. He found himself drawn to the challenge she presented, the promise of discovery beneath her controlled exterior. He tapped his diagnostic pad, the soft chime slicing through the quiet. The Lycians flinched, almost imperceptibly, at the unfamiliar sound. Cirrh's fingers twitched, betraying a momentary discomfort at his relaxed manner. She drew herself up, spine straightening as if to reclaim the distance. He knelt beside the prototype heat dispersal unit, tools arrayed at his side in careful disarray. The Lysians had struggled with the Terran design, their adherence to protocol clashing with the unpredictable conditions of Varela. Mason's hands moved quickly, improvising new connections and recalibrating the interface. His breath misted over the console as he worked, the warmth of his skin melting rime wherever he touched. Sirai hovered nearby, her eyes tracking every motion. She spoke suddenly, the edges of her voice like crystal blades. Your construction is inconsistent. Our models predict a 39% chance of structural fatigue. He wiped condensation from his brow, grinning despite himself. That's by Lysian standards. Terran alloys bend, not break. Flexibility, not weakness. He turned the diagnostic pad toward her, displaying a rotating molecular diagram. See here? The lattice realigns under stress. It's designed to survive the unexpected. She tilted her head, and for an instant her gaze softened, curiosity flickering behind her composed mask. A novel assertion. We will see if it holds. Before he could answer, a deep tremor shuddered through the bay. The floor seemed to roll beneath Mason's boots, and alarms blared, a discordant chorus piercing the frozen hush. Overhead, a rafter groaned, fractures spiderwebbing through the ice. Without thinking, Mason lunged across the gap, grabbing Ciri's arm and dragging her behind a thick support column. He threw himself over her, his body a shield as a massive slab of ice sheared away and crashed down where they had just stood. The impact thundered through the bay, sending shards skittering across the floor. For a moment, everything stilled. Mason's chest heaved with exertion, his body pressed against hers. His warmth radiated into her cold skin, fogging his visor and illuminating the world in a soft haze. He felt the rigid lines of her body beneath him, every muscle coiled and motionless. Then, beneath his gloved hand, he sensed a faint pulse, a subtle green shimmer that traveled along her skin, illuminating the fine network of thorns. She made no move to pull away, her breath mingling with his in the brief, uncertain silence. Her eyes, so alien and unyielding, searched his face, and something in them shifted, just for an instant. The distance between them, cultural and physical, had shifted. For the first time, Mason sensed that the wall of frost might not be impenetrable after all. After the accident, something subtle had changed. Ciri's clinical detachment was now tinged with a careful interest. Her regard no longer felt like that of a scientist regarding an anomaly, but of a peer, perhaps even something more, sharing in the uncertainty of survival. Mason, too, found himself drawn to her, not only by the mystery of her species, but by the way light caught in her thorn filigree, by the music threaded through her measured speech. She moved with a balance of poise and silent power, and in her presence, the cold of Varela seemed less biting, more a veil than a barrier. While Mason prepped the dispersal unit's main relay, the Lysian engineers clustered at the far end of the bay, uneasy with the rising warmth. They conversed in low, fluid syllables that Mason's translator struggled to render, their eyes darting to the Terran technology with open suspicion. The scent of ionized air mingled with their own organic perfumes, a sharp floral tang Mason was just beginning to recognize. Only Ciri stood close to him, her arms folded, posture attentive. Relay is primed. Initiating low-level test, Mason announced, his gloved fingers working deftly over the control panel. The display glowed a reassuring blue, and his pulse steadied in time with the machine's hum. The Lysian engineers flinched as the dispersal core emitted its first pulse, their bodies recoiling from the unfamiliar heat radiating through the bay. Ciri did not move. If anything, she leaned forward, her emerald eyes widening as the core glowed steadily brighter. Her skin pulsed faintly green beneath the thorn tracery, a bioluminescent response Mason had never seen in any dossier. He pulled his hand back from the relay, letting the heat dissipate. As he turned, he met Ciri's gaze head-on. She extended her hand, fingers hovering in the residual warmth where his had been. For a heartbeat, she seemed to savor the sensation, testing, curious. The gesture, so small, felt monumental. Elysian reaching for a Terran's heat, for his presence. Mason watched, unsure whether to break the moment. The back of his hand, ungloved now for finer work, hovered just above hers. He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the careful calculation yielding to something far more instinctive. Then the spell shattered. Suddenly, alarms shrieked throughout the station, harsh and discordant. The Lysian engineers snapped to attention, their voices overlapping in urgent bursts. A technician with a narrow, thorned crest shouted, "Atmospheric surge! Conduit overload in section Gamma 3! System destabilizing!" Mason's mind snapped into crisis mode. He scanned the displays, watching as red error sigils bloomed across the relay's schematic. "Sire, the regulators are failing. We'll have to stabilize them directly." She was already moving, gliding to a nearby terminal, her hands dancing over the controls with fluid precision. "Bypass is insufficient. We must intervene at the source." Her tone was calm, but tension crept into the set of her jaw. "Then let's go," Mason said, snatching his toolkit and pulling up the station's schematics on his pad. "I'll handle the regulators. You guide me." He glanced at her, seeking confirmation, and found her already striding toward the access corridor, unhesitating. Together, they plunged into the station's underbelly. The corridor narrowed, the walls pulsing with the residual heat of the dispersal system. The air grew thick, humidity coiling around Mason's neck as he shed his helmet for clearer vision. Siri navigated the route without hesitation, her skin glowing with each turn, providing a ghostly light. They reached the Gamma 3 conduit, a junction box half melted by the atmospheric surge. Heat radiated from the metal, and the floor panels shuddered with every pulse. Mason dropped to one knee, prying open the access hatch. Inside, the temperature was stifling, far above Varella's norm. Condensation dripped from the ceiling, hissing as it struck hot alloy. Mason's hands moved quickly, tools clicking and sparking as he bypassed fried circuits. Siri's calm voice guided him from above. "Thermal bleed in node D4. Stabilize with manual override left panel." Mason slid his hand along the panel's edge, finding the override lever. He gritted his teeth as the heat bit into his palm. "It's stuck," he muttered, bracing himself against the warped casing. "Focus, Terran. Apply force. Activate the emergency release," Sarai instructed, her tone sharp but steady. She crouched beside him, her presence like a cool anchor in the oppressive heat. He exhaled, then drove his shoulder into the panel. The lever groaned, then snapped free with a jolt that sent him sprawling sideways. Power surged through the conduit, the angry red light settling into a calm blue. The station's alarms faded to a dull chime, replaced by the low hum of stabilized systems. Exhausted, Mason slumped against the wall, sweat streaming down his temple. Sarai knelt beside him, her usually impassive face etched with the aftershocks of adrenaline and relief. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the slow, synchronized rhythm of their breathing. Their eyes met, green to hazel, and something passed between them, a quiet recognition, a mutual respect forged in crisis. Siri's lips parted as if to speak, but she hesitated, searching his expression for a response she could trust. Mason smiled, small and tired. "Guess Terran dramatics aren't always a liability." A corner of Siri's mouth twitched, almost a smile in return. "We value results above method. Your improvisation, unexpected, but effective." Her gaze lingered on him, softer than before. He let himself linger in the moment, the distance between them narrowed by heat and hardship. Siri's hand, cool and elegant, brushed his wrist in a gesture that might have been accidental, but she didn't pull away. The contact, slight as it was, seemed to ground them both. Just as Mason began to find comfort in their shared silence, his eyes flicked to the monitor readouts lining the conduit's interior wall. The energy signature that had nearly overloaded the dispersal unit replayed in a jagged loop. He narrowed his eyes, leaning closer. "Sire, look at this," he said quietly, pointing to the readout. "The surge pattern isn't random. It's too precise. See the intervals? The amplitude spikes are uniform, almost engineered." She stiffened, her pupils contracting as she absorbed the data. No atmospheric pattern produces such regularity, she murmured, voice barely audible. This was not a natural event. Mason's hand found her forearm, gentle but insistent. Someone did this, intentionally. Circe's eyes met his, the gravity of their realization settling between them. She did not recoil from his touch. Instead, she let his hand remain, her own fingers curling softly in acknowledgement. In that instant, the fragile boundary between Terran and Lysian vanished, replaced by the silent, urgent bond of those who shared a secret and a threat. A silent connection forged in crisis. Neither of them needed words to know that everything on Varela had just changed. With the immediate danger past, Mason pressed Circe for answers. That pattern matches ancient Lycian weaponry, he said, voice low but insistent as the echo of alarms faded into the background hum of the repaired conduits. He kept his eyes locked on hers, searching for the truth beneath her practiced calm. Are your records incomplete? Circe's composure wavered. The green luminescence along her cheeks dimmed as she weighed her answer, a silent tension blooming between them. Our records are fragmented, she finally admitted, her tone measured. Legends, mostly, artifacts that resist translation. Her gaze darted to the floor, the first crack in her authority visible. That surge wasn't random, Mason pressed, stepping closer. We saw the data. The intervals match pre-war Lycian energy arrays. Your own archives must have traces. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? For a moment, Circe's pride warred with uncertainty. Then, decision hardened her features. Come, she said, turning briskly. Mason followed, boots crunching over frost as they left the engineering bay behind. She led him through a maze of icy corridors, past sealed doors and crystalline panels etched with Lycian glyphs. The cold intensified as they descended, breath pluming in the air. At last they reached a domed, frost-laced vault. The door recognized Circe's biometrics and slid open with a sigh, revealing the Lycian archives. Inside, the walls curved upward in a vault of pale blue ice, shelves carved directly from the living crystal. Veins of ancient circuitry pulsed faintly beneath the surface, linking data spires and artifact plinths. Circe approached the central terminal, fingers trembling as she initiated a complex sequence. The air shimmered. Holographic glyphs spiraled upward, coalescing into a three-dimensional tableau. Ancient Lycians fleeing a burning landscape, their forms distorted by fear. Overhead, a massive engine hovered, alive with crackling energy, a core pulsing with destructive power. This is the Vera, Circe whispered. The usual clarity in her voice faltered, replaced by awe and dread. A weapon, or so legend says. Our doctrine dismissed it as myth. The hologram cast flickering green and red light over her features, painting her in the tragedy of her own history. But it's real, Mason said softly, his words barely above a breath. He reached out, fingers passing through the ghostly projection. The surge is the Vera, reawakened. It's not legend anymore. Circe's denial crumbled in the silence that followed. Her shoulders sagged beneath the weight of revelation. She trembled, not from the cold, but from the shattering of certainty. Mason, moved by her vulnerability, reached out and touched her arm, skin warm against the chill of her body. She didn't flinch. Instead, her gaze met his, emerald eyes wide with uncertainty and a silent plea for understanding. He offered no words, only the steady pressure of his hand. In that moment, protocol dissolved. His warmth steadied her, and she leaned into it, drawn by a connection deeper than orders or data. Their joined silence was more intimate than speech. The news rocked the Lycian command. Circe convened a council of her most trusted engineers and advisors, presenting the evidence with Mason at her side. Murmurs of disbelief filled the frost-lit chamber, fear rippling through the ranks. But Ciri's conviction was unshakable now, her calm the eye of a gathering storm. From that moment, Ciri became Mason's closest ally. Barriers of protocol and suspicion gave way to partnership. They worked side by side late into the Lycian night, the cold of the station offset by the warmth of Terran heaters in Mason's quarters. Charts, data streams, and fragments of myth sprawled across every surface. Sometimes, as exhaustion pressed in, their conversations drifted from technical to personal, memories of home, questions about each other's worlds, the sharing of laughter that echoed strangely in the frigid air. One evening, with a storm lashing green fire against the dome's edge, Mason brewed a cup of Terran comfort, steaming, spiced, and inviting. He held it out to her, a gentle challenge in his eyes. "It's a comfort thing. Try it." Ciri hesitated, studying the mug as if it were an artifact of dangerous power. Slowly, she wrapped her slender fingers around it. The heat made her filigree shimmer, a subtle green light pulsing beneath her skin. She brought the cup close, inhaling the steam. A shiver rippled through her, and a faint smile touched her lips. Hesitant, but real. "Strange, but pleasant," she admitted, the words tinged with wonder. Mason grinned, his own relief palpable. "Sometimes the unfamiliar is what you need." Their hands brushed as they worked, passing tools, adjusting circuitry, aligning crystalline conduits. At first the contact was accidental, but over time it became deliberate. A brief touch on a wrist, a hand resting on a shoulder, a silent check-in during moments of tension. Each touch was a promise, a wordless acknowledgement of the bond growing between them. Nights blurred together, data collating with increasing urgency. The pulses of the Vera intensified, each wave stronger than the last, threatening to shatter the fragile equilibrium Varela clung to. Mason and Ciri dissected every reading, searching for patterns, for meaning, for a way to outpace the ancient engine's awakening. In the glow of a dozen monitors, Ciri sat perched on the edge of Mason's bunk, scanning the latest energy graphs. Her hair spilled in dark red waves over her shoulders, catching the artificial lamplight. Mason leaned over her shoulder, his breath warm against her ear as he pointed to a jagged spike on the display. "The frequency is escalating," he murmured, concern threading his voice. "At this rate, the dispersal unit will fail, maybe within days." Ciri frowned, tracing the data with one elegant finger. "We must amplify the core's tolerance, integrate Terran alloy, reinforce the crystalline matrix." She looked up at him, resolve shining in her eyes. "Together." "Together," Mason echoed, his hand finding hers atop the datapad. Her fingers laced with his, cold against warmth, and for a moment, all that existed was the space between their joined hands. Yet the crisis could not be held at bay by affection or hope alone. The next Vera pulse struck with seismic force, rattling the station to its bones. Alerts flared in every corridor. Mason and Ciri raced to the dispersal chamber, hearts pounding in synchrony. Inside, chaos reigned. Coolant hissed from a ruptured valve, Lysian engineers scrambled to contain cascading faults, and the control console blared with crimson warnings. Mason dove beneath the panel, wrench in hand, while Ciri coordinated from above, her commands crisp and unwavering. "Redirect the flow to Channel 5, she ordered, fingers flying across the controls. "Recalibrating the pressure seals," Mason shouted back, sweat streaming down his brow as he fought the buckling system. A stray burst of energy sent a panel flying. Ciri caught it, her reflexes swift, and shielded Mason from the debris. Their eyes met in the chaos, trust passing between them like an unspoken oath. The dispersal unit screamed in protest as Mason rerouted the final circuit. "It's now or never!" he cried. Sarai overrode the fail-safes, voice steady. "Engaging Terran Lysian sequence. Now, Mason!" He threw the master switch. A surge of heat and light filled the chamber, flooding them both with energy. For a suspended moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Then the pulse subsided, the alarms faded, and the system settled into a tenuous stability. Breathing hard, Mason slumped back, Circe kneeling beside him. She pressed her cool palm to his cheek, and he covered it with his own, neither caring who saw. Their partnership, forged in adversity, had become something deeper, an alliance of necessity, now inseparable from the fragile hope they shared. But the Vera's pulses intensified, threatening planetary collapse. Mason and Circe, now a seamless team, pushed the dispersal unit to its limits. Together, they faced the crisis, bracing themselves for the storm still to come. Thermal readings soared, fissures spidered across Varela, and the Lycians showed signs of strain. Fine cracks in their thorn filigree, dulled skin, stiffness that made every movement seem brittle. The research station's corridors echoed with the anxious footsteps of Lysian engineers, their once brilliant eyes now clouded by exhaustion and pain. Even Circe, always composed and invulnerable in Mason's eyes, was affected. Beneath the green shimmer of her forearm, a hairline fracture traced through the luminous thorns, threatening to split further with every flex of her wrist. Mason caught her as she paused in the corridor, her features taut, her steps uneven. He reached for her arm, concern flaring in his voice. "You're hurt," he said, his thumb gentle against her fractured skin. "Your systems are failing. Let me try something different." Circe hesitated, pride flickering behind her eyes, but she did not pull away. The Lycians prided themselves on resilience. Pain was endured, not soothed. But Mason's worry was palpable, and something in his presence, the simple act of caring, unraveled her resistance. He knelt before her, retrieving a small vial from his belt. Terran restorative gel, a concoction designed to mend and soothe. He squeezed a bead of the substance onto his fingers and began to spread it delicately across the fracture. The gel shimmered, iridescent against her cool green skin. Circe shivered, not from cold, but from the newness of the sensation, the intimacy of his touch. Mason's hands moved with care, each stroke more than clinical. He let his palm linger over her arm, feeling the subtle pulse of her energy beneath the surface. Then, as if drawn by a force beyond science, his fingers traced the line of her jaw, tilting her face to meet his gaze. Her posture softened, the tension draining from her shoulders as she searched his eyes. For a moment, the chaos outside was forgotten. The only sound was their breathing, mingling in the thin air. "I can't stand seeing you hurt," Mason whispered. His thumb brushed her cheek, warmth radiating into her. Their eyes met, his filled with longing and vulnerability, hers with questions and dawning understanding. He leaned in, slow and uncertain, giving her every chance to retreat. His lips brushed her cheek, a feather-light, tentative kiss that lingered in the space between hope and fear. Circe froze, breath caught in her throat. Then, with a quiet exhale, she leaned into him, her fingers curling around his wrist in silent invitation, as if anchoring herself to the warmth and promise he offered. For Circe, the moment was transformative. She had studied Terran emotions in theory, chemical surges, cultural expressions, the poetry of longing and attachment. But this was something raw and immediate. Mason's touch, his kindness, shattered the centuries of discipline that had defined her existence. Her heart, a crystal organ attuned to the harmonics of her world, pulsed with sensation she had never allowed herself to name. Outside, Varela groaned. The ground trembled, pressure waves rolling beneath the research station. Settlements flickered on the monitors, life support domes failing, Lycian voices crackling with urgency over the comms. The Vera's pulse built to a fever pitch, threatening to tear the world apart. There was no more time. Mason and Circe raced down twisting corridors, past stunned Lycian technicians and failing systems, into the heart of the station. The path led deeper than Mason had ever gone, through a gate etched with glyphs unlike any others, symbols that swirled with ancient energy and unspoken memory. The ancient control chamber opened before them, a vast circular space carved from the living ice of Varela. glyphs coiled along the walls, glowing with the faintest trace of forgotten power. In the center rose a crystalline pillar, dormant but immense, the true heart of the station's defense, the legacy of a passionate, now vanished Lycian culture. Ciri's breath hitched as she gazed at the pillar, fear and awe warring on her face. "The next pulse will be catastrophic," she said, her voice trembling as she stepped closer. "The dispersal unit can only delay it. This system," she gestured to the pillar, "is the key." Mason studied the glyphs, his mind racing. The patterns didn't match technical diagrams, they were expressions, not instructions. He traced his hand along the pillar, feeling a subtle vibration, as if the stone itself was listening. "They respond to something else. Emotion," he murmured, a theory crystallizing in his mind. "Your ancestors' mistake wasn't feeling too much, but not enough." Ciri turned to him, confusion in her eyes. "Emotion is dangerous. It led to the Vera. Our doctrine teaches control, suppression." He shook his head gently, taking both her hands in his. Her palms were cool, trembling with uncertainty. "What did you feel when I was in danger? When I touched you?" Sarai's voice was barely audible, the syllables catching in her throat. "I felt warmth, fear, hope. I wanted to protect you, to be with you, even if it was reckless." Her gaze searched his face, as if seeking permission to admit the truth. "That's the answer, Ciri," Mason said, conviction strengthening his voice. "Let it in. The pillar is waiting for something real, something true." He drew her closer, arms winding around her waist, and she melted into him. The world shrank to the circle of their embrace, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they could save more than themselves. Mason pressed his lips to hers, gentle at first, then with growing certainty, a kiss full of hope and love, of the impossible made possible by connection. Ciri trembled, her cool lips warming beneath his, the energy of her body surging in response. As they embraced, the pillar responded. Light flared from its core, threads of color snaking outward to the glyphs on the walls. The chamber brightened, ancient symbols pulsing with renewed life. The crystalline matrix sang, its resonance growing louder as the defense system awakened, powered by the tide of their shared emotion. Glyphs spiraled and danced, casting swirling patterns of light across Mason and Ciri as they held each other. The pillar blazed, filling the chamber with a radiance that seemed to defy the cold and the fear. Outside, the Vera's pulse faltered, its destructive wave met and countered by the harmony rising from the chamber. In the silence that followed, Ciri drew back, her eyes shining with tears and wonder. Mason cupped her face, and she leaned into his touch, their connection undeniable. The chamber thrummed with possibility, an ancient power, reborn not through suppression, but through the courage to feel. Their embrace, their hope, had become Verella's salvation. The chamber filled with color, the ancient system's hum resonating through Verella. Light burst from the pillar, refracted into spectral waves that danced along the arched crystal ceiling. Mason and Ciri, still wrapped in each other's arms, watched as the energy built, tangible, alive. From the heart of the pillar, a pulse of icy power unfurled, streaming outward in a corona of frost-blue brilliance. It swept through the stone, the circuitry, the foundation of the station itself, and then beyond, racing outward in all directions. The ground trembled with the force of the unleashed system, but this time it was not the chaos of destruction. It was the deep, harmonious rumble of something ancient awakening. The air thrummed in Mason's lungs, charged with a resonance that was as much emotion as energy. Outside, the sky flickered with veins of emerald and sapphire, the auroras shifting, bending, caught in the clash between the Vera's blazing pulses and the system's crystalline cold. The battle raged in the heavens, where the Vera's furious heat lashed down, The defense's icy wave surged up to meet it. Mason could see the shifting glow through the chamber's domed window, lightning forking across the sky, thunder echoing in the bones of the world. For a moment, it seemed as though the planet itself might shatter under the strain. Then, slowly, the Vera's surge faltered. The infernal light lost its violence, its red-orange hue flickering, then retreating before the advance of cold radiance. All across Varela, alarms that had wailed for days now guttered and stilled, their shrill warnings replaced by silence. Cracks that had snaked through the ice fields ceased their spread. The trembling of the earth subsided into stillness. Where the ground had glowed with dangerous heat, frost crept back, reclaiming the land in a sparkling veneer. Within the chamber, Mason watched as the changes found Circe. Where fissures had scored her skin, healing began. Cracks in her delicate thorn filigree closed, her pale green glow intensifying with each breath. Her eyes, so recently dulled by pain and doubt, blazed with fresh light, emerald and unshadowed. The icy energy, once a source of fear, now suffused her, making her appear almost weightless. Mason, exhausted but elated, turned to her, unable to hide his relief. He let his hand rest over hers, feeling the subtle pulse of life beneath her cool skin. "It worked," he whispered, disbelief and wonder mingling in his voice. "You did it, Circe. You saved your world." She looked up at him, her face transformed by emotion. Her lips curved into a smile, her features radiant. She touched his cheek, her hand warmer than ever before, a subtle but undeniable change. "No, Mason, we did it. You showed me the strength of feeling." Her words resonated with gratitude and something deeper, an understanding that bridged the impossible distance between Terran and Lycian. Around them, the Lycian leaders gathered, drawn to the chamber by the cessation of alarms and the new, serene glow filling the air. They stood in silent awe, witnessing not only the stabilization of their planet, but the transformation of their commander. Circe, once the embodiment of Lycian logic, now carried warmth and color in her presence. She stood beside Mason, not apart, her hand in his, their partnership a living symbol of Terran resilience and the unimagined power of emotion. In the hours that followed, the station's corridors filled with Lycians who had survived the ordeal, engineers, scholars, even the most stoic of officials. They watched as the world outside calmed, as the planet's systems came back online, as life returned to a fragile normal. Some approached Circe, hesitantly at first, seeking reassurance, guidance. She met each inquiry with a new tenderness, her words touched with empathy, her logic now illuminated by understanding. Later, when the last crisis was resolved, Mason and Sarai retreated to his quarters. The dispersal unit's hum was now a gentle backdrop, a lullaby of survival. The room was bathed in the soft blue glow of the station's lights, and for the first time in what felt like ages, there was no urgency in the air, only a deep, restorative calm. They sat together on the edge of Mason's bunk, shoulders brushing, the silence between them rich with shared memory. Circe, no longer burdened by old taboos, reached for his hand, her touch purposeful. Their fingers entwined, the coolness of her skin now tempered by a growing warmth that spread up his arm. "Terran, your hands are warm," she murmured, her voice almost teasing. She pressed his palm to her cheek, delight flickering in her eyes at the contrast. The gesture was simple, intimate, yet it carried the weight of all they had endured. Mason smiled, brushing his thumb across her cheekbone. "I was always told Terrans ran hot," he said quietly. "Guess it finally came in handy." Circe closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the contact. "I never understood it," she said softly. "I thought it was a flaw, a lack of discipline, an imperfection in your design." She drew his hand down, holding it between both of hers as if studying it anew. "Now I see it is a gift, my gift." Her gaze flicked up, vulnerable and strong at once. He looked at her, his heart pounding, moved by the transformation in her voice and posture. You saved your people, Sire, and you did it by letting yourself feel. She shook her head, a wry, gentle smile curving her lips. No, Mason. You gave me the courage to feel. You have brought new life to Varela, not just warmth, but connection. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, her body yielding at last, trusting him with the weight of her hope. He wrapped his arm around her, drawing her closer. They sat in the hush, listening to the steady rhythm of the dispersal unit, the faint echo of the ancient system's song. Outside, the sky glowed with quiet auroras, a sign that the battle was truly over. After a while, Sire turned, her eyes shining with the memory of fear and the promise of something more. I have learned to feel, Mason, because of you. Her fingers slid up his arm, threading into his hair, drawing him close. There was no hesitation now, only certainty. She kissed him, not the tentative, questioning brush of lips that had come before, but a kiss full of promise, of joy, of futures unwritten. Mason responded in kind, his arms tightening around her, their warmth mingling, no longer Terran or Lysian, but something new. Together, they sat in the glow of Varela's rebirth, the promise of connection, of feeling, shining brighter than any star. The days that followed were a rebirth for Varela. The ancient defense system, newly awakened and radiant, now pulsed in harmonious sync with Mason's dispersal unit. Where once the planet's climate had teetered on the edge of disaster, the air now shimmered with stability. The battered frost plains, scarred by fissures and heat, were washed anew with delicate rime, each dawn bringing a little more sparkle, a little less fear. The ever-present auroras above softened, shifting from violent emerald and crimson to gentle veils of blue and gold. Within the research station, change was everywhere. The legions, so long governed by caution and tradition, moved through the corridors with a quiet astonishment. At first, they regarded the new equilibrium warily, unsure what had truly saved them. But as days passed, and the world did not crack, as the light brightened and the frost thickened, suspicion melted into hope. Their voices, once clipped and measured, now carried an undercurrent of curiosity, even excitement. They began to speak of what had happened not as a disaster averted, but as an awakening. Sarai was at the heart of it all. Where once she had been the embodiment of cold logic and protocol, she now moved with new confidence, a fusion of intellect and emotion. She presided over the council chambers and the engineering bays alike, her presence drawing both respect and inspiration. Her voice, once crystalline and remote, now resonated with warmth. She became both scientist and symbol, the one who had found the courage to let feeling shape her choices and her world. She led the Lysians in a bold new direction. Data displays and crystalline consoles were recalibrated, not just for efficiency, but for resonance, a concept she explained in words drawn from her experience with Mason. Emotion is not noise, she told a gathering of engineers, her emerald eyes sweeping the crowd. It is signal, it is energy. If we learn to listen, to integrate, it can make us stronger, more adaptable. It can save us. At first, her people were hesitant, their centuries of doctrine slow to relinquish. But they could not ignore the evidence. Their commander's skin now glowed with health, her once brittle filigree healed. The dispersal unit, empowered by emotional resonance, never faltered. The planet's pulse, monitored by 1,000 sensors, remained strong and even. Gradually, the Lysians adopted new protocols, fusing emotion with logic, experimenting with technology that responded to feeling as well as thought. Through all this, Mason and Sire's romance blossomed in quiet, profound ways. In public, they worked as colleagues, partners in planetary renewal. But in private, the walls of protocol dropped away, revealing tenderness and joy. Siri, who had once shied from touch, now sought Mason's warmth at every opportunity. She came to him in the laboratory, lingering at his side after a meeting, brushing her fingers over his hand as they recalibrated sensors together. One evening, as the station's lights dimmed to simulate night, Saray entered Mason's quarters without a word. She found him standing by the window, watching frost gather on the outer panes. She stepped up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist, pressing her now warm cheek to his back. He smiled, leaning into her, letting her presence fill the room with peace. They often paused in their work just to be near each other. A stolen glance over a console, a shared grin as a new solution sparked between them, the touch of her hand on his shoulder as he worked late into the night. For Mason, each of these moments was a revelation. The loneliness he had felt on Varela, the ache of being an outsider, had vanished. With Siri, he was seen, understood, cherished. They were not just a team of necessity, but a partnership of choice. The memory of their first kiss, the spark that had awakened Varela's ancient heart, became a cherished presence between them. Sometimes, in the hush of the laboratory or the privacy of Mason's quarters, Saray would pause, reaching up to trace his cheek with her fingers. Her touch was gentle, almost reverent, and her emerald eyes reflected both the world's new dawn and the depth of her own feeling. "You thawed the ice, Commander," she would tease him, her voice now carrying both logic and laughter. "I hope you realize the gravity of your crime." He would laugh, capturing her hand, pressing it to his lips. "I'll take the sentence, especially if it comes with conjugal visits." She would roll her eyes, but her smile always lingered, softening her features. "Terran humor," she'd say, shaking her head. "It's contagious." Their bond grew deeper with every day. Siri came to crave Mason's warmth, not just the heat of his skin, but the comfort, the courage, the joy he brought. She delighted in the simple things, the way he brewed tea, the way he listened, the way his presence seemed to steady her when the future felt uncertain. Mason, for his part, found in Sire a partner who was brilliant and compassionate, a mind as sharp as any he'd known, a heart now unafraid to be vulnerable. Together, they were a fusion of warmth and frost, reason and heart. On a day when the new frost sparkled brightest, when the sky was clear and the auroras gentle, Sarai led Mason through the station and out onto a balcony overlooking the plain. The land below shimmered, healing and alive, the wounds of the past weeks slowly erased by the planet's patient hand. She stood beside him, silent for a moment, then reached for his hand, drawing it to her chest. Beneath her palm, Mason felt the gentle, steady thrum of her crystalline heart. "This warmth, your warmth, has changed everything," she said, her voice soft but resonant. "For me, for Varela, for us." She turned to face him, her expression open, unguarded, the last barriers between them melted away. Mason brushed his thumb along her cheekbone, marveling at the glow beneath her skin, the beauty and strength she carried so effortlessly now. "You're not alone anymore, Siri. Neither am I." She smiled, eyes shining with hope. "We are a new equation, Mason, and the solution is unexpected." She laughed softly, a sound he had come to love, then leaned in. Their lips met again, a kiss both promise and celebration, as the world beneath them began its long, hopeful renewal. The cold had not vanished from Varela, but it had been transformed, woven together with warmth, just as they were,